nearly 10 o'clock. We're about to get going.
Sean is pretty standout guy, a pretty cool guy in the industry. He's done some amazing work, and have I seen your slides? I think I may have. No, I didn't actually. I didn't manage to actually grab those. But honestly, Sean runs like streams all the time, like Hack the Box streams and Hack the Box kind of like hack it, like I guess community hacks, I guess. And it's just really, really cool to join in those, sit there with him, watch him struggle over things, but struggle with everybody else and go, do you know what? I'm not giving up on this, where I would have just went, no, too much. No, screw that. I'm not doing it.
Going.
Yeah.
Awesome. So with that, it is 10 o'clock. So let's introduce Sean. I know you've just done a great job of doing so. Sean, are you there, my friend?
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Let me get my screen share going. Awesome. So hoping that is sharing. Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is an awesome event, some amazing talks through yesterday, and some excellent talks lined up today. So I encourage everyone to get viewing the talks that are coming out. So with that, let me get on with my talk. So a little bit about myself. As if you watched yesterday, you probably know that I'm part of the Beer Farmers. The Beer Farmers, for those who don't know, is a collection of just a bunch of people interested in InfoSec. We want to try and inject some humor and get like serious messages across, but in a more humorous manner. Sometimes InfoSec can be a bit too serious, so trying to break down barriers through humor and get that across. I'm also a co-leader of the OWASP Scotland chapter, been doing that for a few years. OWASP is an amazing community and charity. There's some amazing stuff coming out of it, not just from the events being run via it, but also some of the tooling that's coming out of it. So if you don't know OWASP, I highly encourage you to at least look it up. You can't mention application security without mentioning OWASP, as you'll see later. I'm also work at Immersive Labs. I'm responsible for rolling out our application security offering, and that will be coming very shortly. I'm really excited about it. Some excellent stuff going on there. And then finally, that's myself on Twitter, SeanRatsSec. So if you want to follow me, mute me, block me, whatever, there it is there. Also, shout out to Shax, who came up with that logo. He's done some amazing logos for those within the community. All right, so onto the content of the talk today. Vulnerabilities are for a kind of a cornerstone of application security. The real premise of application security is making sure that you prevent vulnerabilities in your system, detect them, and fix them. And I found this on Wikipedia, and I think it's a very true reflection of a vulnerability. The area that I like the most is the hostile environment. If you think about it, most applications are internet facing, and internet facing is predominantly where most of your attacks are going to come from. So that's the hostile environment. But narrowing it down and just taking it down to its simplest form, vulnerabilities really are just a special form of a software bug. It's some sort of flaw in the system that's been unaccounted for. And that's leveraged to gain other access or leak data and that. So when you take a step back and look at vulnerabilities themselves, there's different types of vulnerabilities. So they, in my view, fall into two categories, the software and the non-software vulnerabilities. And the non-software vulnerabilities can be things like hardware vulnerabilities. So we saw a few years ago, Spectre and Meltdown. There's newer sort of research going on and publications around different types of hardware type attacks that you can do. I'm not a hardware guru. I think Giles is doing a workshop later, so I thoroughly, highly encourage you to attend that if you are interested in that sort of thing. Site vulnerabilities, so this is more around like physical type access and all that kind of thing. And then your employees, humans or personnel. But if you go look at things like CVE, most of the vulnerabilities you'll find there are software based. And I did put a poll out on Twitter on this a few days ago, and I was actually quite surprised by the results. It was almost 50-50, but a bit more edged towards saying that most vulnerabilities aren't software based. I think it's important to call out that vulnerabilities are the flaw. It's not things being exploited. So there are things like misconfigurations and that's, I don't really view that as a vulnerability. I view that as just something, maybe if you're going to call it vulnerability, maybe a human vulnerability, where it's a human error, not an error in the actual software. So having said that, obviously software forms a very large part of the vulnerabilities, and that's why you need application security. So thanks for attending. The end. No, it's obviously not as simple as that. So first we look, okay, who are we going to blame for all these software errors? Like, there's so many software errors out there, who we're going to blame? And no, it's not about blaming. We need to start looking at why there's so many of these vulnerabilities out there and what we can do to help and help those who are introducing these vulnerabilities or not detecting them. So one thing that's been griping me for quite some time is if you go look at some of the degrees or training courses and that you do, there's very little embedded in terms of security. So what this is here is a redacted transcript of my university degree. And what I try to do is highlight the subjects that had some relation to InfoSec. So what I had in terms of my degree is a Bachelor of Science, and then I did a postgrad, a fourth year Bachelor of Science honors in computer science. And the thing that really grasped me is we had to do mandatory maths. I had choices of different subjects. I chose economics, information security, information systems technology. That's more business side. And in reality, those are very kind of niche things. Personally, I've never really had to use any of the mathematics. I was joking yesterday saying, hey, okay, well, we're going to design this web page. Let's get together and start forming our logarithm for this new page that we're designing. No, what I would like to see is let's start taking some of that out. That's not necessary. If you're going to go down the maths route, you want to do things like cryptography and all that kind of thing, then sure, make it an option, but don't make it mandatory. Instead, put things that are going to matter, like information security. So there are 3 courses they highlighted. The first one I did in second year was information security and operations research. That touched on cryptography, nothing on actual raw application security. And then only in my honors, I did cryptography and network security. That was more focused around network security, not much around application security. And cryptography, again, cryptography focused on the encryption side of things, but learning really the mathematics behind it. It is helpful, but for a real day-to-day job, it's questionable whether it is actually beneficial over something else. So what I've done here is I've taken the current OWASP top 10, and this was the OWASP top 10 from 2003. And I took this and tried to relate it to those courses that I was doing, and seeing out of those courses, which ones would have helped me prevent these sort of issues. So in my computer science course, 3 years standard Bachelor of Science degree, the only thing that was really covered was improper error handling. And this wasn't, and I highlighted in orange or yellow here, because it wasn't really focused on the security aspect, but more the usability aspect. So while that obviously does help in cases where there's improper error handling and you're handling the errors, there was never a focus on you need to do this because of security. It was more about you need to do this for usability. And then going on to the fourth year, again, because I did that network course, I did cover a bit more, but again, it wasn't focused a lot on application security. So we did cover buffer overflows. So I kind of granted that one that we covered that off. Improper error handling, insecure storage, so on and so forth. Vaguely, never really focused on application security. In fact, we were only learning about things like HTML and XML in fourth year honors. Now, I have to say, this was a good few years ago, so I don't know what the university curriculum looks like today. As far as I know, it hasn't changed much. I could be entirely wrong, but there's also security-focused courses or degrees, which I will call out, so there is that. But if you're doing a stock standard Bachelor of Science degree, this is where it matters. You get people who are doing this Bachelor of Science degrees going straight into a job and have never known anything about securing an application, the vulnerabilities that they can introduce. And this becomes important because if you look at it, we're now in an era where there's so many technologies being thrown at you. There's newer and newer technologies all the time. And trying to keep up with this is just really, really difficult. And it's something that I've really battled with myself. There's these new shiny things, GraphQL, MongoDB. I'm probably showing my age, but they are all things that I've had to learn on the fly and get up to speed. And unless you know the ins and outs of them often, you're not going to be able to prevent security issues and prevent security vulnerabilities, things like misconfigurations and so on and so forth. And this kind of goes on to a point of a lack of understanding and knowledge. So I've seen this so many times. Certificates are really like this mythical beast, really complicated and all of that, until you start breaking it down and really understanding it. But I've dealt with this. I've been in this scenario where it's, oh, you have to create a CSR and then you have to send it to the CA, and what's the CA? Oh, you have to import it into a key store, and then you have to get the private key, and it's like all mumbo jumbo. You haven't a clue what's going on, and you just want to get it to work. And then once you've put it in, then you start getting all these errors like the certificate's not trusted because you're using a internal CA or something like that. You put in the error, you go on Stack Overflow, and you get an answer like this. Now, granted, at the bottom, it says for testing purposes only, but how many people actually will read that? I know personally myself, I may or may not read that. I'm normally just looking for the answer that's going to solve what I need to get accomplished. And that's to get the system working, avoid, no longer have the error. And what is shown there is that piece of code is telling the system to trust any certificate. Obviously, this is a problem because this will allow things like man-in-the-middle attacks. And this gets copied. I've seen it systems where someone's done something like this and like fixed it, like, this is how you fix this error. And they'll give it to the teammate or someone else who asked the question. And next thing you know, you got about 5 or 6 systems with this code in it. And it's not their fault. They just don't understand it. They don't understand the repercussions of that. And this happens time and time again. So we see scenarios. I remember doing some courses on application security, and they were pointing out some flaws within example code in some training material. Now, you could question whether that's a responsibility on the trainer to make sure that they fix those things, but it also comes back to the point, like you can't moan at someone about SQL injection if they don't know that it exists. So we have to start addressing this, and by tackling that, as you'll see later, we can hopefully help reduce these issues. Just saw on the previous slide, incorrect solutions from forums. This is a really common one. Even incorrect solutions from existing code or libraries. Developers, rightly so, when you reuse code, reuse solutions, and that's awesome, but it can also be a problem. If there's a flaw in that, they'll just take the flaw and multiply it. Another problem, and I've been down this road, is you can't fix the problem. You want to fix the problem. There's a problem, you've identified it, and then you try to get buy-in to fix it, and it's, no, we don't have time, or we don't have resources, or it's not a priority. Once in a company that I was working at, I found a flaw. Well, there was a vulnerability out that essentially killed any Linux system. As soon as you ran this denial of service exploits, the entire system froze. You could only restart the system by doing a hard reset. In other words, going to the system, pushing the power button on and off. Yeah, and it was a local exploit, so you had to run it locally on the box. Doesn't sound bad, but I injected it into the script that these point-of-sale terminals use to pull down their software. So every time they restarted, they pulled down their software, I injected the script into that script. So it pulled down the software and then ran this exploit. So what would happen is every time the terminal restarted, it would run this exploit and the terminal would just hang. You do that to every single terminal in a retail company, what happens? That retail company cannot trade. And the answer I got was, shrug of the shoulders. So yeah, we need to change that. So XSS and SQL injection, these are definitely not new things. We are still battling the same issues even in 2020. XSS, I've been reviewing some of the CVEs lately, and it's still very prevalent in there. SQL injection, I kind of highlighted in orange. It is still an issue today, but it's becoming less and less of an issue. I don't think it's becoming less and less of an issue because people are getting better at fixing it. I think it's becoming less and less of an issue because less people are using traditional databases. A lot of things are moving things to moving to technologies like NoSQL, so things like MongoDB, Elasticsearch, and that kind of thing. I think that's why that's no longer as big as it was, but it's still an issue. And these things are old. In terms of age, if SQL injection and XSS were a human, they would be old enough to drive and old enough to drink. And this, so as I mentioned, you've probably already seen the 2003 OWASP top 10, and when I was comparing my university degree to what was being solved, but I thought I'd compare this with the 2017 one. This is the 2017 is the current list. So for those who don't know, OWASP top 10 is a list of the top 10 vulnerability types or causes of vulnerabilities in software. And this is produced by OWASP. They do it on a periodic basis. The last one was in 2017. I think 2003 was the first one, or I could be wrong. And I think the next one they're planning is next year. So it's a periodic review of the common causes of security vulnerabilities in software. And the thing that struck me is half of the list from 2003 still remains today. So we're still facing the same issues. So while people are going on about 0 days and all of that kind of thing, the reality is that we are still tackling the same issues that we have known about for decades. I think cross-site scripting and SQL injection were around in the late 90s, so 98 and that. So they're 20 years old now. 2 decades old, and yet they're still so prevalent today. So switching gears a little bit and also covering where development is and where development was and where it's going. So if you take a step back and look where development has come from, traditionally in the past, we used to develop things from the ground up. Pretty much everything, if not everything, was developed in-house at the organization. And all the building blocks and all of that were built from the ground up, and you have your system. Also, deployments or releases were done in big monolithic chunks. And that's important from a security point of view, because yes, while it is a lot more work to review a big, massive release, you had periodic points in time where you could do that. You could allocate resources, like say, okay, great, our AppSec team is going to spend a month on pen testing release XYZ. Fast forward to today, things have changed. We're no longer developing things from the ground up. We're taking chunks from outside the organization, and I'd like to think of them as building blocks. So different libraries, different frameworks, and using that to develop a system. So systems are no longer like built, they are rather maybe glued together. And then in terms of releases, there's no longer these big monolithic releases. It's the constant stream of release. So you're talking about probably a weekly, maybe even daily release cycle, whereas in the past you maybe had a quarterly release cycle. This makes it tremendously difficult from a security point of view, because you have to have someone pen testing 24/7 in order to validate and check everything that's gone out the window. And that's just not going to scale. Also, it's always someone else's thing. So cloud computing, it's someone else's computer. Or open source, I've mentioned open source libraries or frameworks, it's someone else's code. And I did mention this in a talk in SteelCon. If you think about it, an open source library or the framework or whatever is literally someone coding some code in your system. If you take it, and I did ask the question, would you allow anyone to take anyone off the street and code something on your system? And most people say no. But that's what we're essentially doing when we're taking these open source libraries. Now, some of them we can trust, but there are times where there are these libraries that are by an author that we don't know about. Thankfully, most, by far, are doing a legitimate job and have legitimate aims of releasing their open source code, but there are cases where that's not quite the case. So this is an area I'm really passionate about, and I think it's going to become a big target area for attackers. And then lastly, we're also doing on someone else's system and software, so SaaS-based solutions. All your data resides somewhere else, and you just kind of hook into that. Now, that's not saying this is all bad. I mean, there's good and bad things to come from this. So like SaaS is great. I can now just offload all of this work to someone else and get them to do it, or offload some of the responsibility, especially things like performance and uptime and availability, all of that kind of thing. But it can also be a problem when it comes to security. Now, who owns that data? What happens if you do everything right and they don't do things right? You also don't, at times, have visibility into what they're doing. You have to place a lot of trust in them. And yes, there are contracts in that, but I hate using contracts as a means of security. It's all very well saying, yes, there's a contract, but it's always after the fact. When they get breached, your customers don't care that you signed a contract saying that the vendor must do X, Y, and Z. The customer's only going to care that their data was breached. So finally, it was covering the kind of problems that or the changes that we are facing. The need for speed. Things are moving faster and faster and faster, as I kind of touched on this with the constant release cycles and the constant stream. Businesses are getting more and more competitive. And in order to stay competitive and get above the competitor, they're going to have to move faster and release things quicker. They're going to have to innovate faster. And that's all great, but at times that can have a serious risk in terms of security. So what is application security? There's often a misconception that application security is just focused on the code, and it's not. Application security is a whole process and life cycle. So if you look at a very basic high-level view of a life cycle of application, you have your design and planning, hopefully. Then the development happens. So that's where the coding bit comes, building it. Then you test it, make sure everything's working, and then you finally release it. And that's going to involve different people at different stages. So you're going to hopefully have some architects providing input into the design, planning. So you have your product as well. You probably have maybe some developers or lead developers trying to morph what it is they're trying to build or develop. Then you'd actually have the coders or developers develop the system. Your QA test it and validate everything's working and meets the requirements. And then finally, like your operations, deploy it, maintain it in a production environment. Touching on this, it was very siloed in the past. Maybe in the past, your developers and QAs would work closely together, but your operations team was kind of separate. There's a model called the squad model, and that's a self-contained unit where there is no operations team and QA team, and that the team is the squad, and that consists of everyone that's responsible for that entire life cycle of the application. Guess what? You're going to have to include security in there somewhere, and that's why you're going to have to start enabling people. So I think it's also important to take a step back and look at who we are actually protecting our applications from. So in the past, the way I traditionally look at the threats were things like those inquisitive. So much like a cat's trying to figure out what the lizard's doing, it was people, if you go back to real hacking, it was just people trying to figure out how things work, what happened if I change this, how does it react? That's what I view hacking, like the traditional hacking way is. There's also pranks done in a way to play pranks on one another or organizations. There wasn't really a malicious intent behind it. And then like phone phreaking and that kind of stuff. Yeah, you could argue there was some financial impact in that, but then the reality is more about being inquisitive, finding out things are working, maybe doing one over of the big corporate person or whatever, but there wasn't much in terms of financial gain and all that kind of thing. But as you go to today, and that's completely changed. So you've got things like organized crime. That is obviously massive. I don't know the figures, but it's multi-billions. And that's a large driving force in the criminal activity that we face today. We have hacktivism, so we have things like Anonymous, and then we have nation states. I'm not going to mention any nation states, but those are kind of countries competing against one another, finding things about maybe cyber warfare is starting to pick up, but maybe intelligence about other countries and that kind of thing. So let's look at the threat actors that have formed parts of these. They're all, you know, the guys that sit with a balaclava in front of the computer or hoodie or that, right? Like this guy, right? No. So often threat actors are typical human beings, like me and you. And at times they're even kids. Go look at the recent Twitter hack. It wasn't some guy in a hoodie and all that, or nation states and massive threat actors. They're basically kids. Okay, maybe not kids, but they're in their 20s and that. and I think some even younger. The point being is, this whole stereotypical thing that some advanced people on that, you're more likely to be targeted by a kid than some really advanced person. Typical companies. One thing I love to do is give some real world context behind it. Some of the things I'm talking about. So F5. Now F5, for those who don't know, I'm sure most would know, but those who don't know, F5 is a security firm that are focused around more network peripherals, like things like web application firewalls. And this year, there was a vulnerability in their TMUI management interface. And this allowed remote code execution on their F5 firewall. Now, this was important because that device, by its very nature, is trying to prevent attackers coming in. So it's going to be sitting on the external interface of whatever you're protecting, i.e. the internet. Over time, we've seen companies being a bit sluggish in terms of patching things. This has now been actively exploited to use the Mira botnet to target these. This here is the baby camera monitor, and I actually have this in my house. And when I found this vulnerability, I never heard the end of it because I said, oh, it's cool, shiny toy, let me buy it. And my other half says, no, I don't trust that, we shouldn't buy it. And get lo and behold, I never heard the end of it when I did find vulnerabilities in it. But what was actually found in this was I had, I think at the time, Alien Vault that was doing scans, and I noticed some directory traversal. And I thought, that's curious, wonder what this is. And it led me down this whole rabbit hole. From that single directory traversal, I found that I was able to get the Wi-Fi credentials, so the SSID as well as the passphrase for that wireless network. I could control the camera. I could view the video feed. So control the camera, view the video feed, all without authentication. I just had to be on the same network. I could upload firmware, again, unauthenticated, just had to be on the same network. And okay, this was on a private network, most will be on a private network. But some of these, some people put these wide open on the internet. And the most shocking of all is when I was doing my write-up on this, I decided to just Google it, and lo and behold, all of the stuff was found years prior. I think it was like 2 or 3 years prior to when I found it, and nothing was fixed, even though they said they would fix it. And this goes kind of related because that is IoT. So IoT is software still. It has software running on it. So in that case of that baby monitor, it had things like a web server with CGI scripts and that kind of thing running in it. So it's still software. And we see it time and time again, this IoT device has this vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. So at the moment, I think IoT in terms of software security is in a really bad way. Also updates. How do you get updates to some of these devices? It's sure if it's internet connected, it's a lot easier, but what about devices that aren't always connected to the internet? So another example, British Airways. Between August and September in 2018, MageCart attacked this corporation. And MageCart is a criminal group, so that's going to that organized crime that install virtual card skimmers or web skimmers. I think that's the correct term. And what it attempts to do is steal payment information, so credit card details when you enter it online to pay for your flights. And they manage this by modifying a JavaScript library. Now, it's not clear whether this was like open source or where it was, but it doesn't really matter. They've attacked the JavaScript library that was running on the British Airways website. The most frustrating part about this is this could have been prevented by an existing control called content security policy. And that I've kind of viewed as like a firewall to a web application. It defines to the browser what resources can load on that page. So there's an existing control that wouldn't have cost the company any money to implement other than human time and resources. They are now facing a fine of around 183 million pounds because of GDPR. In the past, it'd probably be a maximum at which was 500,000. Because of GDPR, that suddenly ramped up to 183. It's a potential fine. It was issued with the intent to fine. We still have to see if that's going to actually happen. And incidentally, that amount equates to a 747-800. So they lost a 747 potentially. My favorite example, and I never get tired of or using this as an example, not because I hate Equifax and all that kind of thing. I think this example just illustrates why application security is so important and how things can go really badly if you don't do it properly. So in September 2017, Equifax announced that they had a breach. This affected around 145 million US citizens. There's estimates, it's not really clear how many British, but the estimates are still ranging from 400,000 to 44 million. At one time was termed one of the biggest breaches in history. A credit company got a negative credit rating because of this breach. Estimated costs of the breach were about 1.4 billion. That's 1.4 billion with a B. Now that was I think last year sometime, so it might have gone up. I've not heard much more on that. So the important thing to note about this whole fiasco was it was a vulnerability in Apache Struts, which is an open source framework that's used to create websites. And the attackers managed to exploit this, get remote code execution and work their way and exfiltrate the data. Theoretically, I'm not saying this is the case, but theoretically, this could have been a one-line change. If you're doing dependency management properly, it's literally changing the version number, and they could have saved themselves 1.4 billion, as well as all the negative press and all of that kind of stuff associated with it. I will admit that at times it's not as simple as simply changing the version number. Sometimes if you change versions, things can break and all that. That's why you need appropriate testing and that in place, so you can do that with confidence and relatively quickly, because this was a severe vulnerability. This is a bit of a segue, because out of these breaches and all these incidents that we see happen, and I guess my graph, this is not really related to InfoSec, but I thought it's still worth mentioning. We see the same phrase over and over: we take your security seriously. And in some cases, it does relate to application security, because if you really did, would my details have ended up in that breach? Would you have had a breach? Now, granted, not everyone is, or no one is ever safe from a breach. Often it's a case of when, not if. But probably I would say if you have a breach notification, it's maybe not the best time to mention how great your security is, or how much you take security. Rather start mentioning things about how you can improve your security. That's maybe a better way of approaching it. For those who don't know, there's a site called whytheFwasbreached.com, and this comes up with a list of excuses. I just threw this in because I thought this is just pretty clever and entertaining. So we've seen some of the excuses being used, and really, I think often it comes down, not all the time, but many times it does come down to just a lack of security awareness, and even maybe sometimes you could even say caring about security. Not all the time, but maybe in some cases you can. So, been waffling on a lot about the problems that we see and all of that. But now let's start focusing on what we can do to make things better. How are we going to fix this? The first thing, as you reflect right to I think the first slide I did, stop blaming people. Stop blaming your developers. Stop blaming your users. Stop blaming your employees. Blaming people on that is not going to help anyone. If you have a security incident, don't shift the blame. Take responsibility. It's not going to help. Shift the issue away. I've seen cases where someone finds a vulnerability or something and announces it to the company, and the company tries to sue them. How's that going to make the vulnerability go away or be fixed? It's not. So stop that culture. The other thing is we need to stop security being seen as a roadblock. Often security folk are referred to as the no people. We always say no. In fact, recently, our security team was helpful in saying, like, look, we're going to help free up some resources because we need to start prioritizing security bugs, and we can use that to help free up resources instead of just dropping everything and immediately running to bugs. And it's about doing things sensibly. There's always going to be risks, but in my view, security is about managing risks. So let's start making the security teams be seen as a team that's going to help the company rather than prevent you from doing your job. And one way we can do that is around security and awareness. So I kind of touched this on the beginning. How can we expect someone to not do a cross-site scripting or a SQL injection or server-side request forgery if they don't even know it exists? Personally, when I left university, I didn't know most of that stuff existed. It's only because I had an interest in security I found out about it. Many are leaving universities and coding centers and training centers without any of this knowledge. So we can't blame them for not preventing these sort of issues if they're not even aware about it. So the very first step is making them aware about it. And there's different tools that we can use for this. Gamification is a really big thing. Let's start making like little competitive. So things like CTS. So I come from a development background, and traditionally development teams that I've worked in the past are competitive. I want to do a release quicker before you and that. So let's leverage that. Let's use that to our advantage and get teams competing against one another. Have a leaderboard, have a team leaderboard. The other important thing is don't make it something mandatory. That end of year, you have to complete this massive PowerPoint slide or presentation or whatever, and then answer a bit of questions. Tell you what many people do, click, 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 go through answers, ABC, or try different answers, and yeah, I've done the mandatory training. We need to do it so we engage them, we have it at their own pace. That way they can fit it in when they need to. And it's going to be something that they hopefully enjoy doing. Team-based is another good way of doing these things, getting people to work together. I often find that I really enjoy trying to tackle training or things like CTS. So Scott mentioned at the beginning, Hack the Box. I personally avoid doing things like Hack the Box on my own. I enjoy doing it as a team-based event, or trying to take a vulnerable web app and trying to tackle that as a team. Humans, by their very nature, are a sociable species. And this kind of comes to the whole community vibe. We get a community going together. So already, like BSides is an awesome example of this. It started off in one thing in Las Vegas, and it's now grown all over the globe, probably thousands of talks, sharing the knowledge, helping one another out, sharing the awareness. Often it's one thing to fix something, but it's another thing just to be at least aware of it so you can put things in place. or have something to say, okay, or you know what, there's this new vulnerability type. I'm going to go learn it in the next 5 weeks or whatever. I don't have time right now, but at least I know it's there. Things like OWASP that are producing amazing tools. And there's so many good things coming out of other groups. Again, don't build things from the ground up. Leverage things that are there. I know I did say about someone else's code, but if you do it correctly and choose the right tools and frameworks and that from reputable developers and organizations such as OWASP, then that can really strengthen your security. I've done pen tests on things like a Python app that the team didn't know anything about security. But because they used a really good framework, Django, I could find really nothing. The only flaws were business logic flaws. There was no SQL injection. There was no cross-site scripting. I couldn't get any of that. It was, in some sense, a dull test, but that's a good that is a good problem to have. Especially when you're talking about complex things like crypto. You know, there's that saying, don't roll your own crypto. There's a reason for that. It is extremely complicated. Leverage things that people who know what they're talking about and doing have implemented it, and B, if it's a popular library, guess what? It's been tested thousands of times. Okay, not all the time. So we've got things like Heartbleed and that, where it's taken years to find it. But the point being is, if there's anything really like what's termed low-hanging fruit, like really easy to find vulnerabilities, those should hopefully be found really quickly. Tooling. This is something that's going to become more and more important. As I mentioned, things are going faster and faster and faster. We're going to have to start using tooling to help us enable our security when we're developing and maintaining these apps. So I've already touched on things like using built-in tooling. So use things like CSP. It's there, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything. It can save you loads of hassle if something bad goes wrong. Yes, there are pain to put in sometimes, but that pain is worth it. It's going to be a lot less than 184 million pounds. Another thing is, if you, or hopefully are using tooling, don't just throw the tool in there, put the defaults on, and awesome, sorted. It's going to solve all my security problems. It's not. You're going to have to put work in. You're going to have to customize that tooling, tweak the settings, especially things like dynamic application scanners, which scan web applications. You're going to have to make sure that it's scanning everything, because guess what? They're often modern web apps are really complicated. You need to click here, click there, and then you get to that page. Well, make sure you do that and feed that into the tool so it can get to that page. Some of these tools are also not aware of the business logic. So if you think about a scanning tool, how does it know this user should be able to access this? You can't. So you're going to have different scans with different users and then see the results and see where this user's maybe got access to this page and it shouldn't have. And make sure you keep these tools up to date. Some of these tools, I just saw with the F5, have vulnerabilities themselves. Or there's new rule sets, new kind of technologies being brought out. So make sure you're keeping them up to date. And from experience, avoid building your own. It's just another thing to maintain. It might seem cheaper, but in the longer run, it can cost you more, in fact. And then finally, it's all very well having all these tools running in that, but you need to make sure those using it actually know how to use it. How do they interpret the results? What do the results mean for them? We've seen a case, I think it was Target, where they actually saw the incidents or the attackers in the logs, but because no one was really using that or maybe didn't know how to interpret the results, they didn't catch it. And this kind of goes on top of tooling. So automation is going to be really key. We can't keep up with things. The constant stream of releases is just probably going to get more and more. continuous integration, continuous delivery. Click a button, or test pass, great, automatically deploy into production. So you might not even have a chance to test it before it goes into production. So you're going to have to build security within this whole deployment and lifecycle. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is via automation. So again, make use of existing tooling. Don't try to write your own. There's a load of stuff out there. The other nice thing about this, unlike a human, it can work 24/7. So if you want to do a scan every hour, guess what? You can. Whereas a human, you might be hard pressed to say, hey, Joe or Jim or Jane or whatever, can you run this? Can you do a pen test every 2 hours for the next week? It's not going to work. But it's important to note that the automation, the tooling does not replace humans. You're still going to need humans, involved in the setup and configuration and maintenance of these tools, but also for some of the periodic testing that you should be doing. Pen testing is still very, very important. I've done pen tests in the past where I've passed the first time, found some things, great. Run scans, all of that, nothing. Second time I did it, I found a whole bunch of other different, pretty severe flaws. Different people, different set of eyes, different knowledge, that's all good. And that's why we need humans involved. So if we come to end, I think these next set of slides are probably going to be the most important when you're talking about application security, and maybe even security in general. It's a shared responsibility. Now, I know it's quirky. Security is everyone's responsibility. It's a cliche, but it really is. Be it you're a developer, QA, all that, you all have an important part to play in security. Any one of you can find a security vulnerability. Any one of you can help prevent an organization being breached. So I think this is really important, and this all builds that security culture. If there's one thing that you can do to help improve your security, is this security culture. Because guess what? As soon as you have the security culture, the other things just will start falling into place. And Zoom is a really good example of this. And I know a lot of people probably don't like Zoom and still think it's a joke and whatever, but I completely disagree. Yeah, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, they had many security flaws, and I don't disagree with that. I totally agree. They were found wanting, but guess what? They decided that they were going to change their attitude and culture towards security. And I think that took like 3 months just to focus on security. And I think if we can get more companies to do this, we'll find less and less of, like the top 5 falling into the OWASP top 10. Oh, sorry, 5 of the OWASP top 10 from 2003 coming into the 2017 list. Like, I can't stress, like, security culture and attitude makes all the difference in the world. And how you're going to get there is things like training, awareness, don't finger points in that. And then once you have that, you're going to have a much better, robust product. Like Zoom today, I'm not saying it's perfect, nothing's perfect, but if you compare it to where they've come from, it is completely different. It is almost an entirely different product, and they've done an amazing job. And the other companies out there have done an amazing job as well. So, any questions? I don't know if there are any questions from the Slido.
There is 2. So anonymous viewer, or anonymous, has asked, amazing content, Sean. Which one of these observations, suggestions do you wish you had known 15 years ago? You only get 1.
Oof, tricky one. I'd say probably the OWASP top 10. And it comes around that awareness and training and that kind of thing. Like, if I know in the OWASP top 10 years ago, I probably wrote code with a lot of those things in it. And if I had known that 10 years ago, I probably could have also helped people share that knowledge and say, like, hey, or if I'm reviewing code, like, hey, you don't want to do this because of X, Y, Z. And it's all about that sharing knowledge culture.
Well answered. If someone says to me you can only pick one, I panic. So very well answered. I've got something, but I'll use the audience questions first. Libraries or plugins changing owner / maintainer could be a vulnerability as you're now running a new someone else's code. How can we mitigate this?
Yeah, that certainly is a very real risk, and I think it has happened in the past where a owner gave up ownership and someone else took it over. How we mitigate that, it's a really difficult one. I forgot the figures, but if you look at the library management and how many libraries that we are using in our code, it's just staggering, the numbers, and it's just like doing that. So trying to tackle this manually and vet every library that you're doing is just not going to scale. So it's a really difficult one. And I'm not entirely sure of the answer. Perhaps some things like some of the public repository managers, they might do a better job saying, hey, if the ownership changes, well, we won't allow ownership change unless you like go through a stringent security review process. Maybe that's one way of tackling that. But yeah, I don't really have a concrete answer to that.
We obviously saw the fallout. I think it was it LeftPad, just this really simple node package, or was it a node package? I think it was.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
The owner removed it, and as a result, and it was a really simple package. It was something you could have written yourself, but there was thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of applications out there that used this, which broke. Okay, not a vulnerability per se, but what happened next was very interesting, and it happens every single time that I guess TikTok gets banned or something gets banned, or Flappy Bird gets removed from the App Store. We suddenly get the clones of those. People panic. The developers are really moving quick because they're getting breathed on by all sorts of managers. They try and change it. They just grab the first package they see, and it turns out later that it's got a ransomware, crypto. Oh, what do you call it? A cryptocurrency miner. That's one. I couldn't find my words, but a crypto miner in it. And, all of a sudden we've got big industry names who should know better running crypto miners in their main site because of one simple package that has just disappeared.
Yep. Yeah, and this is why I think it's a really important area and something I think, okay, I have no intention of ever doing this, so I'm making that abundantly clear. But if I were an attacker, that's exactly where I would look. Why try to break through the front door when you can just get neatly inserted inside, and then you can break out and you have access to so many things. Also, the other thing to consider is like, even though you might include package XYZ, that in itself has a whole load of dependencies. So how do you make sure? It's just like, yeah, it gets really hairy really quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. We did get another question in from Euless, who, by the way, if anybody's watching on stream, you can absolutely tune into his workshop. It's for hardware hacking. I think he mentioned earlier he feels as if he feels seen. He feels as if he's the hardware guy, you're the software guy, and you guys are twins. But his question was, what is your view on inspiring kids as early as in elementary school to make them security aware?
Yeah, I think it's impact. One of the things that I'm really strong about, and that's why I include things like the real world examples, is it's all very well saying, hey, here's these security vulnerabilities. Like take cross-site scripting, for example. Often training material just shows that as like, hey, you can show this pretty alert box. Yay, wow. Versus maybe showing something like a BFOC. Okay, well, you've now got this cross-site scripting and a BFOC, which is browser exploitation framework. I suddenly have access to your browser. I can start injecting things in your web page and all of that. That suddenly sparks something like, oh, okay, well, this can suddenly affect me. Let's take like TLS, for example. I did a demo with the Wi-Fi Pineapple showing, hey, you connect to this hotspot, and suddenly I can start viewing all your traffic as well as modifying it, unless you using TLS. So trying to hammer home how it can impact them, hopefully that will suddenly make them like, oh, okay, so this can suddenly make a big difference to me. So this is why I should be worried about it. So
honestly, Yeah, no, honestly, just showing anybody a Wi-Fi pineapple is like magic. I mean, the only time it ever gets brought out is for like demonstration. I've bought one. It sits in a drawer. I never use it. I've promised it to someone. I mean, how many of us have done that? They've just bought a ton of Hack 5 stuff, never used it, but it's there, and that gets people interested.
The other thing about that is also the kids, like the cool wow factor. It's cool. So leveraging that as well.
Yeah, it helps as well if someone cool is giving it, like yourself. Like you can actually like get. No, I mean that in a positive way. Like you're actually getting really excited about what you're talking about rather than droning on. And do you remember where it was like when we were younger, and you know you've got a mobile phone that's a brick, and someone comes out to the school and teaches you how you shouldn't use a mobile phone because it's dangerous, and the guy's like average age of 90 to 150, and you're looking at that going, you don't know what you're talking about. But when you see someone like yourself giving a really energetic, like, this is really cool, and look at the cool stuff we can break, and here's how we can fix it, and here's all the cool stuff we can do in between. Honestly, man, I love your work and loved your presentation. Yeah, cool. If anybody wants to catch Sean, he will absolutely be hanging around on Slack. But do go follow him on Twitter at Sean Wright Sick, not Sean Wright something else. That's someone else entirely. But no, go and follow Sean on Twitter. He's absolutely brilliant. He just tweets some good stuff, and genuinely, you can see why I think Sean's awesome. So thank you, Sean.